So please join me in welcoming what are affectionately known as Barlett and Steele.
But the people at the top, we're sitting on $2 trillion overseas. The rich corporations don't want to bring back to this country. And one of the interesting ways that Washington works, well, we can't do anything about it. They don't want to bring the money back. Washington has this way of talking about carrots, but never sticks. And so the simplest thing would be, okay, you've got 1 year to bring it back. If not, that tax is going to double, and then it is going to triple, and then we will begin seizing your assets. That's how you get people. And that just doesn't happen because there is nobody in government with a backbone. And we've also, quite frankly, lost our moral compass in this country.
Well, they did a survey, I think in 2004, that showed that, I may get these numbers a little wrong, but 50% of senators go into lobbying after their Senate career.
Yes.
42% of House of Representatives members, Congress people, go into lobbying. So you have a system that's a little bit rigged. No, it's a lot rigged.
Exactly. So
let me ask again, what is it that people are supposed to do? I mean, it's one thing to be outraged. This is a sort of a contemporary debate in journalism. If you write a good story, people react. They get mad, they get irritated, they get passionate, they want to do something, and then we walk away. That's a little bit our tradition.
You know, the underlying thing that I think everybody agrees has to change in the country is the money in politics. I mean, it's what you're talking about there. It's not just banning senators and congressmen from lobbying, but it's figuring out a way to change the whole way we finance these things. Everybody seems to agree on that. Citizens United, of course, has been further added to this problem. But we had this problem before Citizens United. And a lot of people are talking about constitutional amendment to change the whole thing, money in politics. Obviously, that's a long-range solution. But changing the money ultimately is really what has to be done. We think this is why so many people are looking to their local areas, their regional areas, for a lot of their political activity, because they are so frustrated at the national level. I mean, everywhere you go, you see people upset by this. As part of the research on this book, I spent some time down in Southwest Florida at a veterans center. And in this veterans center, they were from all services, some going back. A couple of the guys actually went back to World War II. And one guy was sitting at a desk one day, and there was a TV playing, and two congressmen were arguing over deficit reduction, about how we got to get this done, how we got to affect this. And this fella, who was one of the heads of it, was about 70 years old. The vein in his neck was just starting to pop up as he was watching this debate. And finally, he just bangs his fist down on the desk, and he says, "Why don't these people talk about something that's affecting us here?" And what was affecting the veterans wasn't deficit reduction. It was that half these guys were on the verge of losing their houses. I mean, one of the great bits of myths out there is that, propagated by a lot of the folks on the right, is that we had this social policy to put all of these people into their houses. They shouldn't have owned houses. And look, we're paying the price for that now. In that Veterans Center were people who had owned houses for decades, but many of whom had been tricked, had been fooled by the exotic mortgage instruments that Wall Street and their buddies have concocted. I mean, Don and I are old enough, as you can all tell, that we remember what it was like to buy our first houses. My wife and I almost had to mortgage our firstborn child, and she wasn't even born yet. So this completely flipped over as Wall Street got deregulated, as all kinds of other things were possible. So to answer your question, you know, money in politics is part of it, but also part of it, and we hope this book contributes to this. One of the responses to the book so far is that people say, "I never understood free trade the way I do now. Your book has made me understand this in a way I didn't. I was always for free trade. I thought that was great." And we make the point in the book that free trade is wonderful if practiced properly among the various partners. But the point we make in the book, our trading partners aren't playing the game the way we are. And until we wake up and do something about that, we're going to have more and more job losses. There's going to be a further tamping down of income for the middle class, loss in benefits, so on down the line. So if we've just contributed to that education of the problem, we feel at least that's a contribution. When we wrote America What Went Wrong, everybody said, let those manufacturing jobs go, let those dirty jobs go. We're going to have the smart jobs, the intelligent jobs, the brain jobs. Those are going to be ours. And that's the biggest difference between this book and really what went wrong. Because while we deal with manufacturing in this book, you're also seeing that there's this evolution now. And a lot of those jobs that were supposed to stay here. And one of them we talk about were computer programmers. You go back to 1990, and the Labor Department said this was going to be one of the fastest growing areas of the workforce in America. And at the time, there were 550,000 computer programmers. And if they said that workforce will grow at a rate higher than the workforce as a whole. If that were true, we'd have 800,000 plus computer programmers. The fact is we have about 400,000. And among them are thousands of the folks that you've just been talking about, the guest workers who've come in ostensibly because there is a shortage of those people. And we actually have a very moving profile in the book of a young man who, in the East Bay, grew up in the LA area, did all the right things, captain of his high school debating team. His father said never lost a debate, went to Cal State for computer science, graduated. Everywhere he went, high marks. His peers said Kevin is a programming god. I was stuck on something for an hour. He fixed it up. And he winds up at a bank in the East Bay dealing with a programming unit that deals with wire transfers, among other things, which have to be constantly changed and updated, apparently. And then one day the bank starts bringing in the guest workers that you're talking about as a prelude to moving all the work offshore. One by one, everybody in his department is gone until it's down to one person, him. Finally, his day comes, and an executive from the bank comes in, asking for his ID and anything else he has that shows his identification there. And the executive later said, Kevin really seemed to be taking this really very well. Well, Kevin went out to his Ford pickup, pulled a 12-gauge Remington shotgun out from underneath it, put it to his head and pulled the trigger. You know, here's a guy who played by all the rules. He gets a college degree, he works hard. In some of the programming jobs, you work terribly hard on those things. And then partly because of government policy, public policy, that we think is awry in this case, he loses that job and ultimately, of course, takes his own life. You know, this is the point of the book. You know, a lot of people talk about this economic stuff like we can't do anything about it. It's the global economy. It's like a hurricane blowing through. What are you going to do about it? And we say that's not true. These are policies. And policies have made these changes. And just as they've made these changes, they can be changed.
You have a quote from a CEO in there who talks about, you know, if we can create 4 jobs in China and we lose one, or we can create 4 people in the middle class and lose one here, that's worth it.
One of the hedge fund gurus about 5 years ago came out with a paper. It got very little attention. It still hasn't gotten much. He didn't want to use the term plutocracy, so he coined his own term. He said plutonomy. The United States now has a plutonomy. It's a country of, by, and for the rich. And it got very little attention. And his point was, just as you said, Phil, the growth of the middle class in China, in India, in Brazil, among other countries, dwarfs the middle class in this country to the point where the middle class here is irrelevant. And this is the hedge fund guy making this point. And now you've seen one study after another. Advertising age has dismissed the middle class in this country as insignificant. So why do people here think they're going to have a better life if all these other people at the top think they're insignificant? Because I got to tell you, they're right. They've crafted this system to work to their interest and against your interest, and that's the way it's going to play out until people here wake up and demand change.
The thing about NAFTA, one thing about it, it also illustrates, unfortunately, the bipartisan nature of these things. NAFTA was negotiated by Bush 1, passed under Clinton. Various other parts of it were implemented under Bush 2. Obama's now dealing with the Mexican truck issue. Somebody sent me a newsletter from, I think it was Phyllis Schlafly recently, for I don't know why they did this, and she was all over Obama because of the Mexican trucks. And this gets to the heart of the misinformation in this country. This thing makes it sound like this is Obama's issue, the Mexican trucks. The Mexican trucks are originally negotiated in the original agreement with Bush 1. Clinton passes it and tries to implement it. Bush 2 tries to implement it. There are a number of things that stop it. Obama, of the last 4 presidents, has had the least to do with NAFTA. And yet here you have somebody peeling out this newsletter that makes it sound like he's at fault with it. But this is typical of the misinformation in the society. And anyway, it drives us crazy as journalists.
How does that as journalists, that misinformation courses through the media?
It courses through the media, and some of the people who perpetrate this misinformation should know better.
You visited the Bay Citizen CIR, Center for Investigative Reporting office yesterday. You saw a lot of very enthusiastic, idealistic,
Absolutely.
ambitious, talented young journalists.
True.
What future is there for them in a system that you yourselves describe as essentially corrupt at some level?
Well, this is where you hope that they will come up with a better system, because that's the only way it's going to work. This one does not work. Classic case, when we grew up in this business, there was a fairness issue. And fairness was defined by the journalism schools, the editors of the New York Times and the Washington Post, as giving equal weight to both sides. Well, you know, that kind of worked for a little while. But now today you can see that concept is so flawed that it should have been dismissed out of hand at the time, because what do you do when one side lies all the time and you give them equal weight? And that is what is happening here now. If the nation does not change its policies, it is on the road to pitting private employees against public employees, and that has happened. And it is going to happen with a real vengeance, because nobody in the private sector whose wages are going down is going to stand very long for paying $100,000 pensions here in California. That is not going to fly. And people who think they've earned those pensions, and they have, it doesn't matter. The rules have changed, and under the new rules, you better fix it, or somebody else is going to fix it for you. I guarantee you that.
But I actually think there's a much more bedrock of belief in X number of people wanting information than sometimes we realize. I don't know exactly how all of that gets connected. I mean, there are a lot of people experimenting with the idea of people paying online for some things, and the same way we paid for newspapers, or do pay for newspapers, subscription magazines. We don't know the answer, but we do think that bedrock is there, and we all have to figure out a way to create a model so that it can survive, because certainly democracy needs it, people need it, people want it. You know, the interesting thing about the right and the left of this country, they both are so upset over the money in politics. Isn't that it? That's the one thing that they kind of totally agree on. So the more we can find things like that everybody can get together on, maybe we can find some solutions to these things.
Thank you all for coming. Thanks in particular to Don Barlett and Jim Steele. I'll be signing books over here. Thanks to General Myatt. Thanks to the Marines Memorial. Thank you for coming.